Princeton University's Keller Center, educating leaders for a technology-driven society.
I'm Vince Poore. I'm the Dean of Engineering here at Princeton, and I'm delighted that we have Ann Mulcahy to deliver the third in our series of lectures on leadership in the technological world. I'll say a bit more about Ann in a second, but I would like to first say a few words about the Center for Innovation in Engineering Education, which sponsors these lecture series. First of all, I'd like to introduce here Sharad Malik, a professor of electrical engineering, who's the director of the center. So let me just say a couple words about the center, and then I'll also say some things about Ann, and then I'll get off and let her talk. So the center, many of you know, of course, that the center was founded fairly recently. It's about 2 years old. And one of the primary aims of the center is to educate students, both engineers and non-engineers, to be leaders in a world that's increasingly technological. And to achieve this, we have to constantly be asking ourselves a few questions. One is, how can we prepare students to lead and to thrive in the technological world? And also, how can we help students understand the role of technology in society and how technology affects all of us, not only engineers, but all of us. Some of the things that we do to affect this type of preparation is, first of all, we expose students to real-life engineering problems, which tend to be a lot messier than textbook engineering problems. Students are exposed to problems where they realize that they need multiple perspectives, not only one simple perspective, but the perspectives of many multidisciplinary problems and problems that show them the importance of technology in societal issues like healthcare, environment, energy, and so forth. Another way that we prepare students to be leaders is to expose them to real leaders, great leaders, experienced leaders, and leaders with courage and integrity. And today we have such a leader. Ann Mulcahy is certainly recognized as this type of great leader. So let me say a few words about Ann. She's chairman of the board and CEO of Xerox Corporation. She's a self-described lifer at Xerox. She rose through the ranks, started out as a field rep, and she's gone through a set of increasingly responsible positions at Xerox: Vice President for Human Resources, Chief Staff Officer, Corporate Senior Vice President, Vice President for Customer Operations, covering international regions, President of a division, President and COO of the whole corporation, and now Chair of the Board and CEO of the entire corporation. Ann's not an engineer, but I'm sure she's learned a lot about engineering, being CEO of a highly technological company like Xerox. She's a graduate of Marymount College with a Bachelor of Arts in English. In addition to her role leading the Xerox board, she's also a director of Catalyst, Citigroup, Fuji, and Target, and she's the chair of the Corporate Governance Task Force of the Business Roundtable. Recently, in recent years, Ann has led the team responsible for what is a remarkable turnaround for the multi-billion-dollar Xerox Corporation. As you'll hear today, such turnarounds are not without challenges and opportunities for exhibiting leadership. So please join me in welcoming Ann. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vince, for that very nice introduction and for your welcome. I thank you all for choosing to be here this afternoon. I love Princeton. I was kind of hoping for this beautiful spring afternoon, but a little snow. And I have multiple reasons for visiting apart from just being able to spend time with all of you. My son's a sophomore at Princeton, and yeah. And I actually dragged him here with me this afternoon, so he's here as well. So Hey, Kev, how are you? So as Vince said, I'm not an engineer, but one of the first lessons of leadership is to really appreciate all the capabilities and skills that are required to run a company and build great teams. So I'm fortunate enough to have a great team that has just an extraordinary amount of great technology and engineering talent. And it is really near and dear to our heart. Xerox was a company that's founded on innovation. It has been the success of our past. It clearly will be the success of our future. And that's why it's really appropriate for me to be here this afternoon and really speak as it relates to this topic of innovation in engineering. So I think the center has a great purpose, and it's very near and dear to our interests at Xerox. So what I'd like to do this afternoon is talk a little bit about leadership in the context of a turnaround. It's particularly interesting during a crisis time frame. And after that, spend a few minutes on something that's really important to the future of technology, and it's kind of a quiet national crisis that we're going through, as Tom Friedman speaks about it. And that's really what's happening in terms of the production of great scientists and engineers as it relates to the future of this country. And then hopefully talk about a few solutions that we're trying to put into place at Xerox that begin to address that problem, certainly in combination with other corporations. And I promise I'll end on time and certainly have time to take your questions as well. So I'll talk about the Xerox turnaround, but unless you've been living under a rock, you would know that this is a company that just about went out of existence a few years ago. It was probably one of the most well-publicized corporate crises that has emerged certainly in the last decade. We kind of called ourselves early adopters of the corporate crisis. So we were certainly kind of by ourselves back there in 1999. Xerox appeared to be doing very well. We had just come through the decade of the 90s, delivering extraordinary results, outpacing the market by a wide margin. And then late 99 and early 2000, it appeared that things began to unravel very, very quickly. That's never the case, by the way. There's always long routes in terms of those kinds of problems. But it does appear that you hit a wall quickly. In our case, we were attempting a lot of change throughout the corporation. People focused inside versus outside, so a lot of market trends were passing us by. We also, when you do that, you allow kind of that window of opportunity for competition to get better and toughen up, and certainly lots of new competitors came into our field. If that wasn't enough, we had ourselves discovered some accounting improprieties in Mexico that turned into a worldwide SEC investigation, a little bit of a distraction. And I think we would look back and say that really in the broad daylight of hindsight, we took a bunch of actions that really weren't terribly smart. So we actually kind of coined this. It was before the movie The Perfect Storm. And really the point was that when you take an issue in isolation, you can address it. When you have compounding issues, sometimes the effect can be overwhelming in a company. So by May of 2000, this was a company that was in very deep trouble. Revenues were declining double-digit. Profits had gone to a loss situation for the first time in recent history. Cash on hand had shrunk to the point where the little cash we had was kind of captive in international markets and we couldn't access it. Our debt had mounted to just under $19 billion. As you can imagine, we were a little bit concerned about our problems, and our responsiveness to customers were slipping, so they weren't real happy. We were losing employees who were reading in the papers every day that it was a company that would be certainly going into bankruptcy, and our shareholders, in the space of just a few weeks, had seen the value of the stock cut in half, and it was continuing to head south. That was actually just about the day I was named President and Chief Operating Officer, so I think, truth be told, I could not say that this was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. But one of the great things about coming into leadership at a point in time like that is that you really figure out quick where to get help. You get bold about making sure that you make decisions and take actions. And I was not shy. As a matter of fact, I think my asking for help became my forte. And I enlisted a lot of people to help save the Xerox Corporation. One of them actually was Warren Buffett. I had never met him, and I picked up the phone and called him. And as he is known for, he called me back. And we had a discussion about Xerox. I told him I had a story to tell him that I thought he would find compelling. He invited me out to Omaha, and I, of course, was telling this story hoping that Warren would invest in Xerox. And over dinner, he mentioned that he never invested in technology companies. And I'm in freaking Omaha saying, what am I doing here? And what turned out to be probably one of the luckiest things in my career, because he became a source of great advice. And one of the things that he said to me was that I'd been drafted into a war I didn't start, and to focus on customers and lead your people as though their lives depended on your success. And the beauty of what he was telling me is that there's a lot of distractions in business. There's lots of constituencies that can call for your attention, but don't ever get confused about those that make the difference. And customers and employees really have to be at the top of your list. So in that case, I was fortunate. I actually had a pretty loyal customer base who wanted the Xerox brand to survive, and we had an incredibly loyal employee base who wanted to save the company. So we went to work. And somewhat uncharacteristic for big companies, most of the time was spent listening to employees, listening to customers, listening to industry analysts telling us what they thought. And our customers told us we had great technology, but it was our responsiveness and our ability to really meet their requirements in an efficient way had slipped. Industry experts told us that we had a great array of technology, but we better make some choices and focus and do it quickly. And employees told us they would do whatever it took to save the company, but they needed clear and consistent direction so that they could actually have a path to follow. So we laid out a plan, and it was nothing brilliant. It was pretty straightforward. We put an incredible focus on cash, and that probably sounds very logical, but this was the end of the 90s, and nobody was focused on cash in the 90s. It was all growth, and companies lost their focus on cash, and that's what makes companies tick. So we really started to manage a company on cash, and it really does require a very different discipline than managing a company just on a P&L. We knew that we were non-competitive and that the gap was huge, so we set a target to take $1 billion minimum out of the cost base to start to close the gap and make sure that our ratios began to approach benchmark. And at the same time we were doing that, we also wanted to invest in the future. So we wanted to place some bets in terms of future investments that would pay off for this company in the long term. So fast forward, here we are today, and fortunately we're in a really different place. We have no core debt in the company. We reduced all of the company's general debt, so the only debt we have is for our financing business. We built back $8 billion of equity for our shareholders, which certainly you could say restored, because we lost a lot of it in the early part of the decade. We took out that first $1 billion of cost and then took out another $1 billion, and we're just about at the third $1 billion of cost. And I think the company now is well regarded at being really benchmark in a lot of metrics, and for a company in terms of things like time to revenue, time to market, things that really define a successful business. And we did it the old-fashioned way. It was tough. We made tough choices. We worked with best-in-class partners, and we are relentless on productivity. It's just never-ending. We're a Lean Six Sigma company, and any day of the week we've got 1,000 black belts just looking for the next productivity problem that we can wrestle to the ground. and fortunately consistently increased earnings over that period of time. As a matter of fact, for the last 17 of 18 quarters, we've consistently increased earnings and met or exceeded earnings expectations. So to put it in context, 6 years ago, we lost about $300 million. Last year, 2006, we made $1.2 billion. And probably the understatement of all time would be that I have learned a lot along the way. And I'd begin by saying one of the greatest and most important competencies for big companies is the ability to listen, to connect with customers, to connect with markets, to connect with employees, because that is really gives you the opportunity to identify problems and opportunities early. And that's really what it's all about. That's where you can solve problems before they become crises, and where you can identify opportunities before you're playing catch up in terms of the next trend. The second area is about communications. Of course, it's natural that you should be communicating in times of stress, but actually, instinctually, people go underground. And they try to tell stories that give people hope, and your people are reading one story in the papers and they're hearing something else inside the company. Your communications have to be consistent, they have to be constant, and internal messages equal external messages. And that's the world we live in today, and it's really got to be done with a great deal of focus. I think we learned that oftentimes the way out of trouble is back to basics. There's a lot of people who look for kind of the silver bullets. There's a lot of people who, consultants, everybody wants to help, and they've got some approach that they believe is unique in trying to solve some of these problems. But the reality is that it's often the things that made you great in the first place that need to be restored to get the company back on track. And I remember Warren told me that as things just seemed overwhelmingly complex, he said, business is a lot simpler than most people make it look. And it was just such an important thing. I mean, he kind of brought it down and talked about revenue and expenses. Everything else is interesting, but don't get confused about the fundamentals of business. And finally, that when you find yourselves in a position of leadership or a position of power, you better make sure that you surround yourself with some good critics. Because no matter how open you are or how unassuming you are, people want to please. And that is not a gift. That actually turns out to be a liability. So making sure that you surround yourself with people who have the courage to tell you like it is really important. But I think the most important thing that we learned was about what makes big companies great, and that's the alignment of people around a common set of goals. And being big is not an advantage unless you're aligned. As a matter of fact, it's a huge disadvantage when you're not aligned. So this context of bringing your people with you and actually being able to touch your employees, have them believe in the mission, is hugely important to moving big companies quickly. And we were really fortunate that was really what allowed this turnaround to take place. So I have to say that people usually get that part of the turnaround story, because restructuring, boosting productivity, tough choices, I think this is what American companies are really becoming pretty well known at and very good at, but and particularly when your backs are up against a wall. But the actual real power of the Xerox turnaround now when we look back is that even though we were in the worst of times, we actually continued to invest in the best of times. So we were ruthless in cutting costs because we had to survive. But we were very focused on investing in the future so we could be successful. So despite the circumstances that we were in, we didn't take a dollar out of research and development. And interestingly enough, that might seem like a logical decision, but when you kind of owe your lives to the banks, it was a pretty contentious decision, and one that had to be defended all the time. But together with our partner Fuji Xerox, we kind of maintained an investment in R&D of about $1.5 billion, which we've continued to do through this entire time. And I think, people kind of wonder how we made that choice, that to be so tough on costs in one aspect, but yet preserve R&D. And it seems like kind of an interesting question to me, because I think for those of us that had been at Xerox and for a long time, this was about creating a future. No one wanted to, quite frankly, solve financial bankruptcy and be faced with technological drought down the road, and trading off the future was not going to be a reasonable conclusion. So today, that's really what's driving the results that Xerox is delivering, and we are certainly in a very different position than we've been in the past. The past 3 years, we've brought about 100 new products and technologies to the market. It's the most prolific period of time we've had out of our research and development pipeline. 70% of our revenues come from products and technologies introduced in the past 2 years, which I think is one of the best ratios in the, certainly in our field for sure. But you think about taking that revenue out of the equation, and certainly this would not be the topic I'd be addressing today. So, fortunately, we stayed the course. So let me bridge now and say that I kind of hope that there's some learning and some parallels from the Xerox experience that play on a broader basis. And when I look at where we are today nationally, I do think there are some parallels, because this premise, if you stop investing today in terms of future capabilities, there really are some serious consequences to pay down the road. And I think that has a lot to do with the situation we find ourselves in as we think about American competitiveness and technological preeminence that has certainly been our history. And there's lots of changes happening. You all know certainly a lot of those come from the progress that's being made certainly in other economies, and primarily places like China and India. And that's all good news. If you're a competitive society, you welcome that and say, that's a terrific advance in terms of global progress. And as long as we have playing fields that allow us to compete, then that should not be the reason we're concerned about our own competitiveness. The ones we have to be concerned about are the ones that we create ourselves. And failing to invest in our future, and certainly to nurture our own technological infrastructure, is a very big problem and will have significant consequences down the road. And we're starting to see some of that. If you look at American college students getting degrees in science, we've fallen to 17th in the world. I think we graduated about 400,000 bachelor's degrees in science. That's about 1/3 of what got graduated just in Asia. The National Science Foundation reports that 21% of all science degrees are being awarded by Chinese universities. We award about 6%, and we are way behind not just China, but the European community, Japan, Russia, India, and barely ahead of South Korea. Federal funding for research in mathematics, science, and engineering as a share of GDP has declined by 1/3 since 1970. So you can look at it nationally, or you can look at it from a business perspective, and you'd say just at a time when we are in dire need of, quite frankly, the kind of skills that really have our companies growing, the people who are prepared to fill those jobs are shrinking. And even, quite frankly, the qualified people that we've really depended upon from other countries right now are remaining flat, but expected to decline as their home countries are becoming more competitive, and quite frankly, our country's becoming more restrictive. I was in Russia and India last week looking to open a new research center and really assessing the qualities in Russia and India to really house a new Xerox research center. And in India, it was just compelling, the fact that most of the research centers opening in India today are actually importing U.S. educated Indian students back to India, that there's literally a shortage right now because of the amount of investments that's taking place in India. So it truly is a world that's booming and somewhat leaving us behind. And I think when I think about what we've been through for the past few years, if there's a line between failure and success, it is always about the quality of your people and the innovation they bring to the market. And particularly true in this country. You know, I'm sure you've all read The World is Flat, but it's a pretty compelling premise that our ability to constantly innovate new products, services, and companies clearly has been the source of America's horn of plenty, and it is the reason why we've had a steadily widening middle class for the last 2 centuries. And it came from companies like Xerox and IBM and Ford and Dell and Cisco, and clearly that has been where the high-paying jobs have come. And these jobs create more jobs, and kind of the rising tide floats all boats is a premise in this country that certainly we've all benefited from. So this is not the kind of thing that you notice overnight. Unfortunately, the real impact of some of the statistics that we're seeing lie a decade or 2 down the road, and the fixes, quite frankly, also begin downstream in primary and secondary educations, and that's something that we're spending a lot of time on at Xerox, and really beginning to address the pipeline issue in terms of making sure that real motivation and excitement about science takes place in the schools. So it's a big problem. I tend to be an optimist, but this is one that clearly needs to be solved by business, government, and education. It's got to be very much a joint focus and effort to really begin to address this. And while I have the opportunity to address you, I'd say part of the solution has to be that the talent base has to be more inclusive. We have to actually include 100% of the population to really attract and get the best platform of talent for this country. And our statistics there have been not terrific as a country, although I'm delighted to see what's happening here at Princeton, and we work really hard at it at Xerox as well. But clearly, diversity has to be a part of really solving the problem, and making sure that the percentage of women and minorities that really are coming out of the pipeline really do avail the widest pool of talent. So we're working hard on it, and actually out of 150 internships that we brought into Xerox last year, about 40% came from women and minorities, which really is such a huge benefit in terms of the talent base that we're able to choose from. And if you stay at it for a long time and it's sustainable, you begin to really see the benefits of it. So at Xerox, I'm fortunate enough to have inherited a company that's been focused on this for a long time, long before it became in vogue. And as a result, it's one of the most diverse business teams in corporate America. This week, we announced a president of Xerox. So the number 2 person at Xerox happens to be a woman who began as an intern, as an engineer, and came up through the ranks and grew up in the projects of New York, an African-American woman who's now president of Xerox Corporation. And the head of all of our technology and research is a woman from Belgium. And that doesn't happen overnight. It happens because there's focus over a long term to make sure that people are engaged and motivated and stay and continue to grow in their roles. So we're kind of passionate about the topic. We think it's really an important one to think about. And I think there's just great work happening here at Princeton that we think there's lots of opportunities for us to partner on as well. I've already hit up Vince for some Princeton interns in the Xerox engineering program and some research collaboration out at our Palo Alto Research Center, because I think that this is a place that we care about a lot at Xerox, and that kind of collaboration really makes a difference. So I'm going to thank you for your interest and attention in being here this afternoon, and I'd be delighted to take questions and open it up to anything that's on your mind that would be of interest to you. Thank you very much. We've actually come through a period of time where we've transitioned from from an analog business to a digital business. So we've had kind of declining analog while we've been growing our digital revenues. So actually, for us, we grew our revenues for the first time last year, and now they're on their way back up. But Xerox will be what I would call kind of a modest organic growth company. That's the nature of the technology business these days. It's actually the hardware part of the technology price takes about 10 to 15% of revenues out of the equation every single year. So you have to grow at 10 to 15% before you register a point of growth. Our services business offsets a lot of that, and then there's a certain amount of inorganic growth that complements it. So organically, we're about a 5% growth company, and with kind of inorganic, we did an acquisition this week, actually, for about $1.5 billion, but we'll probably get into a high single-digit growth company.
How about profit-wise?
Profit-wise, we've been double-digit profit growth for the last 5 years. And a lot of that comes from just pure productivity. It's driving productivity all the time in terms of how we look at our business, and just getting better at one of the things that I talk to our engineers about all the time is that innovation has become hugely important in terms of cost. That there's been a real focus now on design for cost that is hugely important, and there's as much excitement about that as there is for, innovation for differentiation and value and functionality. So we spend a tremendous amount of time on that, and the opportunity for innovation for better cost efficiencies drives a tremendous amount of improvement in our profit results every single year. Yes?
You were named president. How did you put together a team that you could trust and depend on after sort of that period of turmoil before then?
So the question was, when I was named president, at that period of turmoil, how do you put together a team that you can trust and you can depend upon? And it's really an important question. I was talking to Ursula Burns, the person that was named this week, and one of the great things that happened is that actually the announcement came out on Tuesday, and the first full market reaction day was Wednesday, and the Xerox stock went up much more than the market, and we were kind of saying that's just such a great thing. When I was named president, the stock went down 16%. So not a vote of confidence, but a difficult time. Yeah, having a team, not just that you can trust, but a team that is complementary in terms of strengths and competencies is hugely important. I'm not an engineer. I think I've built one of the best engineering teams, certainly that is there. And so complementary strengths, really understanding what you do well and what you don't, and make sure that you have great respect for the kind of competencies that you need for the leadership team of the company. But it is important. One of the things I did it was a time of crisis, and I wanted people to choose to be with Xerox, not to feel that they were captive to this organization. So with my leadership team, Joe Cahalan's here, who's head of our foundation and communications, and he's heard me tell this story often, but I said to our leadership team, this is not a time when anybody can be looking over their shoulder. You have to be focused on, we've got a company to save here. I cannot waste a moment worrying about whether you believe, whether, there's a hallway conversation that's different than the conversation that's happening between us. So if you don't feel good about this and confident about it, let me know. I'll help you leave. I'll make it attractive for you to leave so that none of us waste any time. I thought it was one of the most motivating speeches I'd ever given. 4 people left. And it was great because, although a little scary at the time and it didn't happen all at once, the fact is it gives you that opportunity then to build a team that has that shared value system of what you're about, and this had to be a time where it had to be about the company, not about individuals, and I needed that desperately. And that team then that I built in 2000 to a person is still with Xerox today, and I think would tell you that it's been the most extraordinary management leadership experience of their career, turning around a company. It's been pretty powerful. So we're a tight team. In the back?
Yes, I was wondering if you could give us a sense of how Xerox Company and Xerox Foundation is currently working with universities and what might be a glimpse of the strategy going forward? Are there any changes there?
Yeah, I'll start, and then Joe, you may want to say a couple of words. But a lot of what we do with our foundation is we identify kind of core areas because there's a million requests, and if you're going to have impact, you actually have to focus and have a couple of areas that you want to go deep in so that you can actually make a difference and have an impact. So I'd say there's three that we really focus on from a foundation perspective. One is science and engineering graduates. So we fund, scholarships, projects. Our engineers work in high schools. We fund labs in primary schools to get people focused on, really loving science and wanting to continue with it as a career. So that's one area. We focus on diversity. It's really a huge, important part of our company's value system. So we also fund then a lot of efforts that are specifically focused on making sure that the pipeline of diverse candidates is available in fields that, certainly we think are important to technology companies in general. And then the other piece is environment and sustainability. So there's a lot of work going on in terms of certainly, emissions. I was just actually in one of my labs yesterday, and I love this, but we had one of our research people who has developed like transient documents, documents that literally disappear, and the paper's reusable, because 70% of what we do, we basically throw away on paper, and it's really a terrible source of waste for the environment. So it's a non-ink based print that disappears in a time frame that you can program, hours, days, whatever. The paper's reusable, and so we're funding now a major research project on this kind of transient document scenario. We do a lot with solar energy out of some of our research labs, a whole set of environmental, we do a lot on sustainable forestry because we're on the other side a paper user, so therefore sustainable forestry, making sure the standards for forestry are. So I think net, we try to keep our foundation aligned with things that we actually know something about and can add some value, because generally speaking, if we make a donation, our people are involved and embedded within it as well. Kind of we got skin in the game, and it really helps. Is that fair?
Fair.
Okay. Yes?
Sort of a bit the balance between pure and applied research and sort of what you see that as a company, and also what we should be doing nationally.
So a balance between pure and applied research and, kind of the balance of that and what we should be doing nationally as well. So actually Xerox got there have been books written about Xerox's inability to commercialize its research and its disconnection from, purely commercial projects in the past. And so we've been highly criticized, actually, for not doing a very good job of commercializing our research in the past. We have now 4 research centers around the world, all with kind of core competencies that we focus on. And some percentage of what each of those labs done is kind of connected to the core business and is applied to our engineering efforts or our, what I'd call, kind of 3 to 5 year time frames. So, all sorts of, media projects, lots of and a lot of what we do in terms of services like language linguistics and compression technologies and all that stuff, directly related and applied to kind of Xerox customer problems, very kind of problem-based research. About 20% of our research is way upstream. And it's really looking for kind of next generation solutions. It includes kind of anthropologists who really look at just work practice kinds of problems. So it tries to identify problems before they even occur to our customers. So examples of that are we're, trying to apply the work for like printed organic electronics to electronic paper, flexible media that can be used to really truly become, digital media, flexible digital media. Lots of, upstream projects on using printing for areas of medical research. Sometimes printing genetic codes actually does a better job of pinpointing, disease and applications than other methods of looking at it. We'll never commercialize a lot of the things that we do in upstream research, but what we've gotten better at is either spinning them off, licensing them, partnering on them, commercializing them in other ways, and opening up the research agenda so that if you want to hire great researchers, there's got to be some freedom and flexibility in the agenda. So we think that that's about the right balance for us. I'm probably not the right person to talk to about it from a national perspective, but I think we've learned through the past that you need both. You need to find out a way as a company today to somehow commercialize the value of kind of non-specific research, and that there are new innovative ways to do that. Yes?
Tagging on to that question. So since you guys have so much research, I know part of what you do is you just license that technology out to companies, and I know that Howard, for instance, is a startup in the Bay Area right now.
Yep.
And they're writing on technology from Xerox Corp.
Yep.
How do you go about that decision-making process to figure out what technology you're going to keep in-house and what you're going to
It's a great question. Yeah, great question. So the question is, when we do decide to license out our partner or invest in, spinning it out versus developing it ourselves, how do we make that decision? And, I'm a big believer in that we're not really good at commercializing anything that's either non-core or near core from a research perspective. So for example, PowerSet, which comes off a set of research competencies in PARC, it's about natural language search, which is really a very exciting idea and is potentially one of the real competitors to the Google stronghold over time on search technologies. All of the competencies for natural language search sort of resided in PARC. We use it. We use it for things like we have a huge litigation search practice where we use a lot of natural language search to support litigation support. So we'll embed it in our solutions, and then we have this decision. We know it has much broader uses and much higher value. And that's when we look for other ways to kind of spin it out and make sure. So in this case, we both licensed it. We also became an equity owner so that, if it takes off, there's a payback to our shareholders. And we also put PARC people into the company as well so that, they can bring back as well and share some of the learnings from the commercialization of the technology. It's I'd say the mistake we made in the past, that's a really hard decision to make. When you got something great, you want to hang on to it, and we did, and that's how Apple got created, and Adobe, and all the other companies out there that, spun off from Xerox. But I think we're in a way to say, get it out there, commercialize it as quickly as possible while it's still in a leadership form, and don't try to hold on to it.
Why don't we take one more question, and then we can break. We're going to have a reception after, so
Great.
We'll be here for discussion.
There's one here, yeah.
To follow up on the decision-making part, this is a twofold. So it sounds like when you were named CEO and you had to come in and really listen to what you were saying you were hearing from your clients and otherwise, and you had to make some decisions about what you were going to focus on. Can you say a little bit about the process that you went through professionally to figure out what to focus on? And then the second part is how you personally managed what must have been a very difficult process for you to make some very nerve-wracking decisions.
Well, I think, and quite frankly, one of the reasons we got in trouble is we lost our capability to make choices. We just liked everything we saw, and we just built businesses or divisions around a multitude of good ideas and started to suffer from, the kind of mile-wide, inch-deep disease that happens in big corporations. So the way we went about it is that we did kind of a ruthless assessment of competency and benchmark performance. So every group, every product, every part of Xerox, every value chain element in the company if it was under benchmark in terms of performance and there were, gaps to competitiveness, had to either submit a plan that said, realistically, you got 6 months to a year to get it to where it needs to be, or I can partner and get a competency kind of brought into Xerox, or I'm going to close it. And we had a lot of businesses that just, couldn't hunt, and tough decisions. I started one of them. I started an inkjet printer desktop business, and it was just really, to this day, one of the most exciting technologies. It was a completely different approach to inkjet. It's a business that needed huge populations, huge market success before it gave good returns to the company. So it was kind of on a 5-year slope of investment and returns. And at the end of the day, we were not going to be in a leadership position, and it was just a good idea that arrived in the market too late and clearly was not going to. We were not going to be able to invest in that point in time, so we shut it down. So it really was a series of decisions, and they were really hard. And one of the interesting things about a crisis is that it clarifies your decision making. It's a lot harder to do when times are good to make those tough decisions, because we knew this was there going to be a company if we didn't make the right set of decisions. So I think it does enable a boldness in terms of choices that perhaps is harder to do in good times than it is in bad times. But it was all based upon, demonstrating competency and success and, real ability to grow the business in the future versus just a good business or a good idea that wasn't best in class. So, okay.
Thank you
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.